Jasmine Crockett's resilience and authenticity in the face of Karl Rove's attempt to undermine her stands out as a defining example of what true leadership looks like when pressure is applied. When Karl Rove, a man known for his decades of political maneuvering and his ability to cut down opponents with sharp words and strategic framing, directed his energy toward belittling Crockett, it seemed like the typical scenario where the seasoned political insider would control the narrative. For many, being on the receiving end of such attacks would result in hesitation, defensiveness, or an emotional response that could easily be twisted to their detriment. Yet Crockett did something very different. She stood her ground with an authenticity that could not be manufactured or rehearsed. Rather than adopting the same combative tone or trying to beat Rove at his own game of calculated rhetoric, she leaned into her own lived experience and values, which gave her a strength that was unshakable. This moment revealed that resilience is not just about withstanding an attack. It is about transforming that moment into an opportunity to demonstrate truth, courage, and humanity. Her response was not shaped by the need to look clever in the eyes of the media or to score points with a soundbite. Instead, she reached deep into her own life and used her personal story as the foundation of her reply. This approach was powerful because authenticity has a force that cannot be countered by strategy alone. Karl Rove is an expert in political theater, someone who understands how to twist language and exploit weakness, but authenticity creates a shield that those tactics cannot penetrate. When Crockett spoke, there was no pretense. There was no attempt to hide vulnerability or to perform for an audience. She simply allowed her real self and her truth to come forward. That level of honesty disarmed Rove completely, because he could not spin or diminish something that came from a place of raw reality. Her resilience was also seen in her ability to remain calm and composed under fire. In moments where many would have cracked under the pressure or responded with visible frustration, Crockett remained steady. That steadiness itself is a demonstration of strength. Resilience in public life often requires not only internal fortitude but also the ability to project confidence when every instinct might push toward defensiveness. Crockett's composure in that moment showed that she has an unshakable sense of self and that she refuses to let others define her worth or credibility. This is especially significant because political spaces are often designed to test and undermine women, particularly women of color, by questioning their authority or attempting to frame them as emotional or unqualified. By not giving in to that trap, Crockett exposed the weakness of Rove's approach and flipped the script on him. The authenticity she displayed also resonated with the audience in a way that Rove's carefully constructed rhetoric never could. People listening to her weren't just hearing political talking points. They were hearing a human being sharing a piece of themselves. That kind of connection cannot be faked, and it is what inspires people to rally behind a leader. When individuals see someone who is willing to stand firm in the face of condescension and hostility while still maintaining integrity, it creates trust. Trust is the most powerful currency in public life, and Crockett gained it not by trying to dominate Rove with cleverness, but by choosing honesty and resilience as her weapons. Her ability to turn an attempted humiliation into a demonstration of dignity highlighted the fact that resilience is more than survival. It is the act of reclaiming one's voice in spaces where others try to silence or distort it. Crockett did not allow herself to be defined by Rove's attempt to belittle her. Instead, she defined the moment by inserting her own truth and perspective into it. This redefinition of power in the exchange was a testament to how resilience can shift the entire narrative of an interaction. In a way, it was not just Rove who was schooled, but also the broader audience who witnessed what it looks like when authenticity is wielded as a tool of resistance. Furthermore, her response reminded everyone that true resilience is not built overnight. It is cultivated through years of facing challenges, overcoming obstacles, and learning how to navigate spaces where one is underestimated or doubted. Crockett's journey into public life has been shaped by these very experiences, and when she confronted Rove, all of that history came to bear. Her ability to respond with such clarity and confidence came from the resilience she had built through lived struggles, and that history gave her authenticity real weight. People could feel that she wasn't speaking from theory but from the deep well of her own reality. That grounding gave her words more power than any political strategy could deliver. Even as Rove tried to steer the conversation back into his domain of political spin, it became increasingly clear that his usual weapons were ineffective. He could interrupt, he could deflect, he could try to minimize her. But none of it worked because Crockett's authenticity was untouchable. That was the true measure of her resilience. Her capacity to remain herself even when someone with more years of political experience tried to strip her of credibility. Many in politics fall into the trap of shaping themselves to please audiences or to protect themselves from criticism, but Crockett demonstrated that real strength comes from refusing to abandon authenticity under pressure. The power of personal stories to dismantle political manipulation and expose deeper truths was at the center of Jasmine Crockett's response to Karl Rove. In politics, it is often the case that those with the most polished talking points, the most rehearsed lines, and the most experience in spinning narratives dominate the conversation. Karl Rove has built his reputation on precisely that ability, creating frames that shape public perception and using language to turn weaknesses into strengths or to cast doubt on his opponents. Yet what his strategy could not withstand was the undeniable force of a personal story grounded in lived experience. Crockett's decision to respond by sharing her truth was not just a rhetorical move. It was a reclamation of the moment, one that cut through all the noise of political theater and forced the audience to confront something real, unfiltered, and deeply human. Stories carry a power that facts and statistics, however important, often lack. Data can be manipulated, numbers can be twisted, and even historical events can be reframed through partisan lenses. But a personal story resists that manipulation because it belongs to the speaker, and no amount of spin can take it away. When Crockett shared her story, she reminded everyone watching that politics is not just about policy debates and media narratives. It is about real people, real struggles, and real lives. This shift made it impossible for Rove to continue playing his usual game of minimizing or redirecting. The truth of her experience shone through with such clarity that it exposed the emptiness of his attempts at political control. The effectiveness of her story also stemmed from its emotional resonance. Humans are wired to connect through stories because they evoke empathy. When someone opens up about their journey, their challenges, and their triumphs, listeners can see themselves reflected in that narrative. Crockett's story created that bridge between her and the audience, and once that connection was made, it was no longer possible for Rove's dismissive attitude to carry weight. His attempt to undercut her authority fell flat because the audience could feel the authenticity of her lived truth. In that moment, Crockett wasn't just a politician sparring with a strategist. She was a human being speaking from the depths of her own reality, and that humanity broke through the calculated facade of manipulation. The other reason her story was so impactful is that it reframed the entire encounter. Political manipulation relies on controlling the frame of the conversation, setting the terms, deciding what counts as valid, and steering attention toward carefully chosen narratives. Rove is a master at this, but when Crockett told her story, she shifted the frame away from abstract political posturing and toward lived truth. Once the focus was on her experience, Rove's tools became useless. He could not argue against her reality, and he could not redirect the conversation without looking like he was attempting to silence or invalidate someone's lived truth. By shifting the frame, Crockett effectively dismantled his manipulation strategy and revealed the hollowness of his approach. Personal stories also expose deeper truths because they cut through the artifice of political language. In a world where people are used to being bombarded with talking points and spin, authenticity stands out. Crockett's story revealed truths about resilience, about the struggles faced by those often marginalized in society, and about the dignity of standing firm even when others try to belittle you. These truths were not abstract concepts but realities drawn directly from her life, and that made them undeniable. The audience could see not just the surface-level clash between two political figures but the broader narrative about power, resilience, and justice. Her story forced listeners to confront these deeper issues, pulling the conversation out of the shallow waters of manipulation and into the depth of human truth. What makes this dynamic so powerful is that it highlights the limits of political spin. For all of Rove's experience and mastery of language, he could not overcome the authenticity of Crockett's storytelling. This demonstrates that even in highly manipulated spaces like politics, there are tools stronger than spin, truth, vulnerability, and lived experience. Crockett's choice to rely on her personal story showed that the most effective way to dismantle manipulation is not always to counter it with equal force, but to sidestep it entirely by offering something it cannot touch. Her truth became a shield and a sword, simultaneously protecting her from Rove's tactics and cutting through the illusions he attempted to create. The exchange also illustrated how personal stories have the power to shift public perception. Viewers who might not have known much about Crockett before this moment were introduced to her not just as a political figure but as a person of depth and courage. They saw her vulnerability, her honesty, and her strength, and that image contrasted sharply with the calculated, dismissive posture of Rove. In the battle for credibility, she won not by shouting louder but by being more real. That kind of impact can resonate long after the moment has passed because it speaks to people's desire for leaders who are genuine rather than manufactured. Crockett's story also tapped into a larger truth about the role of marginalized voices in political spaces. Too often, these voices are dismissed, silenced, or ignored, particularly when they challenge the established order. By telling her story, Crockett was not only dismantling Rove's manipulation in that moment but also making a broader statement about whose voices deserve to be heard. She proved that stories from people who have lived through struggle and adversity carry a weight that cannot be erased by political insiders. This was a reminder that authenticity and lived truth are not just tools for individual defense but also acts of resistance against systems that thrive on erasure and control. The lasting impact of her choice to share her story lies in its ability to inspire others. Watching her dismantle Rove's manipulation with her truth showed that authenticity has a power that even the most seasoned political operators cannot defeat. It encouraged others to believe that their stories, too, matter and that speaking truth to power is one of the most effective ways to break through the machinery of manipulation. It reminded people that politics does not have to be reduced to games of spin and strategy. It can also be a space where truth and humanity prevail.